we do that?
Well, the Strait of Hormuz stays closed.
Now, wait a minute. Would it be closed or would it be a toll operation? They'd open
closed,
it to traffic.
Probably closed. Why would Iran give up any of that leverage that they have? Because now nobody's fighting them,
But what would be the purpose of closing it? I mean, they can't get their own oil out if that happens. Wouldn't they turn it into a toll booth operation?
They might, but that's economically unsustainable as well. Who's going to pay the 20% VIG to Iran? Or even worse, Trump proposed that we would do that a couple of weeks ago, and then he walked that back in about 5 minutes. But they've also closed off another entry point in the region. The Houthis have done that,
right?
And so there's really a stranglehold on any kind of oil coming out of the Middle East, and what all the people in the region are doing are trying to figure out new ways to move that oil through pipelines and stuff. That'll take years.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, the second option is we can continue bombing until we completely deplete all of our resources, all of our weapons. What's the result of that?
Well, this was a horrible idea to begin with. So every day you continue just makes it worse. This was never a good idea. It's never been a popular war. To continue is just a waste of more time and resources. This administration had the gall to last week say we're going to drop that 8 death toll number from 18 to 14 because those last 4 happened after we had ceased having the war, which would be news to the families of those 4 dead service people.
And disgraceful.
It is disgraceful, and the wounded numbers they played with, those numbers have changed, have increased, and Gary, we talked about that a little bit last week. But when you say continue, what are you going to put land forces down there? Over 70%.
That's option number 3. Don't get ahead of me here. So I think if we just continue bombing and don't go in for an invasion until we run out of weapons, it's going to cause us to lose standing with our allies, as if we could lose any more. But what about Taiwan? Isn't China just sitting back watching this thinking, wow, our golden opportunity to seize Taiwan is right down the road. All we got to do is wait for the U.S. to run out of munitions, and in we go. And what are they going to do about it? And that's a pretty serious consequence.
No, it would. But let me back up a second, Ed. We're losing this war. I don't care what lies Trump spews, with this profanity on a daily basis. We're losing this war. Iran has no motivation to end this. We've talked about how these drones, which are very cheap, are doing a job. There's no motivation for Iran to come to the table. So when you suggest we keep losing, we keep continuing a war we're losing, that by definition is irrational.
Mm-hmm. And apparently Trump was so concerned about the death toll of servicemen going up that they have scaled back the flights over Iran, the bombing runs, and instead they've been using these long-range missiles. That's the problem. Those things cost billions to make, and they take years to make, and they've been doing that because they are staying back away, in the Gulf and sending the long-range missiles in instead of sending the airplane. So that's the stock of weapons that's really been depleted, and they pulled some from the Far East to do that. And that's the concern, is that those things are really, we're going to be out of them for a long time. And, but we're not pivoting to use the drone warfare as quickly as other countries like Ukraine is. Mm-hmm. They of course offered that technology to us, but Trump has to be in the right mood, I guess, to accept something like that.
The point I need to further make, though, is Iran knows there's these midterms are coming up, and they want Trump to pay a price for this. They did the same thing with Jimmy Carter in 1980-81. That the day that Reagan took office was the day they released those the hostages. So Iran, they're no dummies politically. They're going to make. And as a Democrat, I'm happy to see Trump pay a price for this. disastrous decision, immoral, illegal war unprovoked war that he's starting. And they lie to us about this issue of these resources, Ed. These Republicans are saying there's no issue there. That's a flat out lie. Mm-hmm. There's a serious issue in terms of munitions.
There's a reason why the Constitution required Congress to declare war and gave that power only to Congress, because the idea is that you need to have buy-in from the American people that to decide to put your blood and treasure on the line. And instead, they wouldn't allow just one person to make that call. And so in Congress back in the 70s decided, we're going to have maybe something that really happens quickly that you have to go react to, but then you have to come back to Congress within 60 days. They've completely gaslighted everybody on the 60-day rule. They're using fuzzy math, saying, because we declared a ceasefire, the 60-day clock stopped. Now we're at 6 months. There's been no congressional approval of this, and it's no wonder that only 33% of Americans think that this war is a good idea at all.
On this week's Meet the Press, Senator Mark Kelly was asked by host Kristen Welker about the depletion of U.S. munitions in this Iran war. Let's hear what he said about it.
Let me read you some of NBC's exclusive reporting. U.S. military commanders have been picking and choosing which Iranian missiles to intercept amid an effort to preserve the Pentagon's diminishing supply of weapons. What is your response to that report?
Well, it's pretty obvious to people when you're in a conflict now for 5 months and you're flying, in some cases, hundreds of sorties a day, attacking targets just to drive the numbers up. I mean, Pete Hegseth talked about this a lot. And by the way, the guy doesn't know what he's doing. He's incompetent. He should have never had this job and he should be fired. But they were all about the numbers. A conflict that, he was talking about setting records, going over 10,000 targets, 12,000, 14,000. Most of those targets are hit with multiple weapons. So, of course, we've expended tens of thousands of weapons. And it takes, as Pete Hegseth said in the committee hearing, when I asked him this question, it's going to take years to replenish these. This is by their own making. They're not keeping track. They at this point, this president and the people around him are incompetent.
Given the dwindling munitions, which you're referencing, Secretary Hegseth, as you well know, asked for an additional $67 billion more for the war with Iran. He said it's necessary to sustain military readiness. Will you vote to approve that $67 billion, Senator? Do you see that as necessary?
Kristen, they're also asking for $1.5 trillion for the defense budget this year and a supplemental. When I got to the Senate just 5.5 years ago, the defense budget was $740 billion. It's more than doubled in 5.5 years. We're now approaching numbers of like what the rest of the world combined spends on defense. Do we really feel that we're that threatened? And we need to spend these sums of money for our defense? We've got programs that this administration is going to spend money on that aren't going to work and things that we don't need. If we had some competent people running this department, you could figure out how do you defend our nation in a way and give the troops what they need within a reasonable budget. What they're asking for is not reasonable.
Same thing I always say. Who do we feel threatened by? We've got all these submarines running around with nuclear weapons that can hit any city in the world multiple times, and everybody knows it. Nobody's going to launch a nuclear attack against us, and a ground invasion is utterly out of the question. Nobody can put together a ground invasion of this country with a supply line running clear across the Atlantic or the Pacific. It's just not doable.
Well, each month that goes on, Ed and Gary, the numbers are going to get worse. It's a 70%, over 70% disapproval now on this war. It's going to get worse. It's not going to get better. What about this is going to get better? And there's no, you talk about, end games. there's no end game that is worth doing it. Just getting the hell out of there. We've got to cut our losses.
Well, now there is a third option, gentlemen, which is invade with ground forces to actually try to implement regime change. Of course, it's going to result in a heavy loss of life. But what if the idea is to take us right back to 1953, where the whole thing started, find another Shah to put in power, who will do our bidding. We'll make him a multi-billionaire. He sells us Iran's oil. He'll have an elite Gestapo to stay in power. And we just start the whole situation over again. I mean, it's
that's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. And the terrain in Iran is very mountainous. That there are 90 million people that they would, if we invade them, they're gonna be insurrectionists.
So which of those three choices is he going to make?
I think he's going to cut and run eventually.
Are you saying will he make or should he make? He should get the hell out. I mean, he should cut his losses and get the hell out of Iran. This is a bad decision. The Republicans are going to get their asses kicked in November. It's getting worse. Yeah. And so the Congress is going to get more assertive because the Democrats are going to be in control, and that'll make a major change. But you can't continue a war that the public does not support.
Right. And we're now at odds with Israel on strategy on this thing. They don't want to stop fighting Hezbollah in Lebanon. So they're continuing on regardless. So now you've got Trump and Bibi cussing at each other behind.
So if we just leave and declare victory, then Trump can say he solved settle a 10th war and get a Nobel Peace Prize, right?
I think it's always important to keep in mind, as we've reminded our viewers and listeners, we had a stable inspection program in place under Obama that was agreed to by I think 7 countries signed on to that.
I want to turn now to the elections. The New York Times columnist David French published an op-ed last week pointing out a strategy that Republicans are apparently considering as we approach the November election. It comes right out of the Constitution, Article 1, Section 5, and it says that both the House and Senate will decide who they will seat as members. And here's a direct quote from it. Each house shall be the judge of the election, returns, and qualifications of its own members, unquote. So in other words, if the House, now in Republican majority hands, determines that they want a Republican who lost an election for the House or Senate to a Democrat this fall to be the person seated as a member of Congress rather than that duly elected Democrat, they can make that happen with a simple majority vote. And they can literally overrule or simply ignore the results of any election for any House seat or Senate seat if they don't like it. So really, there's nothing anybody can do about it because it's been done over a dozen times in our history, and the Supreme Court itself has, in 1972, in a case called Rudebush versus Hartke, ruled that, quote, which candidate is entitled to be seated in the Senate is, to be sure, a non-justiciable political position, unquote, which means, in other words, you probably know this better than I, no court can rule on it. There's no way to appeal it. So they'd probably only try to pull this off if it's a tight election. I mean, if it's a landslide for the Democrats, they're not going to be able to do it. But if it's close enough, if enough voters are thrown off the voting rolls like Jeb Bush and Katherine Harris did in the 2000 election, throwing thousands of eligible voters off the voting rolls, which should have led them directly to the nearest federal penitentiary, 20 years with 2 off for good behavior, but no, they didn't. What do you think, gentlemen? Could something like this happen? I mean, as desperate as Trump is to maintain power, and with good reason, what action would he take off the table? None that I can see.
Right, and Mike Johnson would certainly do it. The concern is, and you're right, that Supreme Court case from 1972 did say that the Senate makes the final call on who gets to be the senator. And when you read that provision in the Constitution, and any kind of commentary about it. It was supposed to set up procedures for how they would operate.
Yeah.
Remember, they were creating a roadmap out of nothing to say, this is, we're going to have a Congress, and it's going to have, a House of Representatives, and it's going to have a Senate, and, they have to meet at least once a year, all of this stuff that we're basically setting out the framework. And now, with how highly partisan we've become, it's look what happened in the last one. Biden completely smoked Trump in the Electoral College. That wasn't enough to stop January 6th.
And 8 million popular votes.
Yeah. So what's to stop them from doing it, even if it's a landslide?
Well, I think the key is what you mentioned about it needs to be so it's not close enough. What's happened though, month to month, it's getting worse. The blocks of people voting for Trump, he's underwater, including the one that I heard yesterday, which I think is a big deal. The independents have gone the other way, which is a big deal. But the non-college educated voter who Trump's brags, and I saw a video last night. He goes, I love the ignorant. They're my base. He's bragging. He literally said that. Yeah. But he's underwater with the non-college educated voter. So these areas where he gains support, he never, the three of us run this table. It'd be a cold day in hell, but we'd never vote for that, for that clown again. But the numbers, I think, are getting stronger is my point. I don't think it's going to be close enough where that could be pulled off. But listen, anything is possible with this. He's a criminal, convicted felon. He will do anything. What's interesting now, John Thune, who's got a little more character than Johnson, because Johnson is just a poodle for Trump. But he's been pushing on this SAVE Act, saying you can't, senators, you can't go off for your August vacation or whatever. And Thune is saying, look, the numbers aren't there. What's it take for you to shut the hell up and move on to another issue?
Yeah. New York Times says Trump's attempted theft of the midterms is already underway, and he's using the full arsenal of the federal government. It's led by election deniers and loyalists, the FBI and the CIA hunting for pretexts to discredit state election officials, while Justice Department lawyers craft legal arguments to prosecute them. And even the Postal Service, you guys know about that, floating a Trump-approved plan to roll back mail-in voting. So a close election, remember, is easier to steal, than a decisive one. And Trump's speech a couple of weeks ago removed any doubt that he intends to sow chaos in November. So instead of discouraging Americans, that should inspire us to vote en masse if we want to save this republic. Let's listen to Mark Elias as he destroys the myth that the federal government, in particular the president, has any authority to be involved in safeguarding the elections.
The Constitution gives the states, not the president, the authority to set the time, place, and manner of federal election. It gives Congress the ability to override the states in many instances through legislation. So like one of the lies that we keep hearing, one of the things that Donald Trump and the administration and their supporters keep repeating over and over again, and which the legacy media is buying into way too often, is this idea, well, it's a federal election and therefore the federal government, i.e. the administration, the executive branch, obviously has an important role to play here in safeguarding. Let me say it again. The U.S. Constitution gives states the authority to set the time, place, and manner of federal elections. It gives Congress the authority to pass legislation overriding the states. It does not give the President of the United States any authority. Zero authority. Not any authority anywhere to be found. Not whether he declares a state of emergency, not whether the state of New Jersey has a software glitch, not whether he doesn't like mail-in voting. It doesn't give him any authority.
Well, I think it's pretty clear. I mean, Elias has made that, that point again and again. The further point there is elections are run by the states, and it's all a matter of control. Where Trump's trying to control and federalize this, which, as Elias just noted very strongly and correctly, is not what the law provides for.
And that's why Elias has won. I think he's only lost one case, one of the election cases, and has won more than 65 or 70. So, it's he knows what he's talking about, folks.
Gary, did you hear this week that Trump's crowd is trying to go back to the Supreme Court on a mailing issue, on a mail ballot issue? Did you hear anything about that? Because the court had ruled a couple of weeks ago that the postmark, as long as it's postmarked by the date of the election, it has to be counted, even if it comes in after the date of the election.
Right.
So, but I heard something. I don't know. Maybe you did too, and I didn't follow up on it. Maybe I will before next week's show. But I think they're going back to the Supreme Court now, which is not even in session. So I'm not quite sure what they think the court's going to do while they're not in session.
Well, you're listening to the Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network with me, Ed Golly. My co-hosts are Gary Gibbons and Kevin Carey. It's time for a quick break. When we come back, we'll have the poll watch, find out about the Democratic Socialists of America, and who's funding these Republicans these days. It's sure not the middle class. All that, along with more of the issues the conservatives never want you to hear about.
Are you a writer, inventor? Do you have questions about your intellectual property rights? Well, tune in every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 11 o'clock for Joy on Paper. Once a month, I will have a special guest, the writer's legal eagle, Bill Larson of Larson & Larson, who can answer your questions. Protect your valuable work. Email me your questions to patsy.radio@gmail.com and then listen in every Tuesday and Thursday at 11 a.m. right here on Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network. That's patsy.radio@gmail.com.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
And now it's time for the Only a Conservative Could Think It Minute with your host, Ed Golly.
Well, our convicted felon in chief is running the biggest grift in American history. The unprecedented scale of the president's corruption was exposed by the recent release of his financial disclosure report, which revealed that he made $2.2 billion since he returned to the White House. His various crypto schemes, thousands of stock trades, and financial entanglements with foreign governments such as Qatar and Saudi Arabia are practically the definition of conflict of interest. Trump made $635 million by issuing a meme coin, while nearly 1 million investors in the coin collectively lost $3.8 billion. Trump's thousands of stock trades often occur just before or after he makes market-moving decisions. Sadly, Republicans who spent 2 years railing about Hunter Biden's influence peddling are almost all silent as Trump and his crime family shamelessly exploit the presidency. Evidently, the president has a dim view of his fellow Americans. Think about that. It's time for poll watch, Gary.
Yeah, the Washington Post Ipsos poll this week says that 55% of Americans disapprove of the Supreme Court's performance, while 41% approve. Only 25% believe that the justices are ruling on President Trump's policies based on the law rather than their own ideology. And
I think it's important to emphasize that's not been the case over the years. That's a relatively new dynamic that the court's been held in such low esteem.
Yeah, I think you're hearing more and more that people are coming out and saying they are just being partisan. They're legislating from the bench. You can look at their decisions based upon who the president is, and they'll move it to the right every time.
And speaking of the president, his poll numbers now are 34% approval, about 66% disapprove. But among Republicans, it's still an astonishing 78% that still approve of
Well, they must not have to go to the grocery store because 66% of Americans say they would describe the cost of groceries as unaffordable, up from 45% before the Iran war started 6 months ago.
But in the high 70s, it was in the 90s. I mean, it's dropped 20%. So even
Yeah.
though it's still, I mean, you wonder what planet these people are on, but they're very partisan. But it's dropped. It was in the low 90s when he started his presidency.
And the biggest number we look at is the independents, because they're the group that has the capacity to swing the election decisively.
And he's getting killed,
Getting murdered.
He's way underwater with independents.
Yeah,
Yes.
and what everybody's saying now is they're focusing on the fact that he's not focusing on the problems that people have in their daily lives. He's talking about, all these monuments he wants to build in the ballroom, and you turn around every day, there's something different. Yesterday, Congress decides to go after Fauci. So, none of this is stuff that people are concerned about. They want this war to stop. They want their prices to come down. They want to be able to buy a home. People are getting squeezed and they can't do anything about it. And their leaders aren't doing a damn thing about it.
Well, you have Trump and you have people like Mike Johnson, and to a lesser extent Thune. I think Thune has pushed back some, but they convey a false reality, a false narrative. And as you said, Gary, people are worried about paying the rent. They're worried about healthcare. Their nursing homes closing, the hospitals closing, the housing issue. I mean, Trump should have been trumpeting that housing bill that was bipartisan, that he wouldn't even support. It went into effect just because he didn't veto it, but he didn't sign it. But that would have at least showed he cared. What's happened as a matter of politics now, Trump is telling these people, these Republicans up for re-election, that they have the quote permission to criticize him, because really being tied to Trump right now is not helping you get reelected in November.
Yeah. All right. Tell us quickly about Judge Sullivan's order regarding the Epstein files.
Well, we Epstein, you've said this before, and I agree with you, Ed. I think this war in Iran is often more just a diversion of Epstein. Mm-hmm. And we're not the only people that have said that. I've heard that from other quarters as well. But this is tied back to our good friend Todd Blanche, and Katie Fang won what's called a preliminary injunction. She's a lawyer and a media person, and we could spend 30 minutes on this, but the bottom line was the Judge Sullivan said to the Department of Justice, and more so to Blanche, because Blanche is the acting attorney general, you're not complying with the statute, and you need to do that. And he's given a deadline of today for the DOJ and Blanche to give unredacted documents to the judge for what's called an in-camera review. And what that means is the judge will look at the documents in chambers and then decide what can be released. But again, I want to emphasize, and we've talked about this in great detail, Gary, but we've read the portions of the statute. There are very few exceptions. I'll give an example. Katie Fang, who has a podcast, there was an email that was between Epstein and another predator. It wasn't a victim, and they redacted out the email address and name, and she made the point, which is very well taken. There's no basis for that. You're not protecting a victim, but because the email talked about underage girls, and it was clear it was from another predator. It wasn't a victim. Victims would not be emailing Epstein. That's a silly premise to begin with. So D-Day is today, and Blanche is going to have to put up or shut up. These documents are going to be released unless you want to modify the statute. And this judge is holding their feet to the fire. I don't know, Gary, if you had any thoughts you wanted to add that.
Yeah, there will be a reckoning for Todd Blanche. I mean, you can't ignore court orders, and they're doing it. ICE is doing it. Everybody in this administration is doing it, and there has to be a reckoning. And so when we take power back, these people all have to come in and explain, why the rule of law doesn't apply anymore, because that's what our country has really been based on.
There's a mentality that Trump has tried to put forward of ignorance, and also that you don't have to follow the law because they are lawless. They do not give a damn about the law. But this statute that was entered into, signed by this president in November of last year is very clear. And it also, I want to again emphasize, requires the attorney general to provide reasons for redaction. You just can't just not provide documents or redact documents.
Yeah.
And you've got to do what's called a redaction privilege log. Gary knows about this. You have to identify what documents you're not providing or redacting and give reasons for that. And they're not even doing that. Bondi failed in that, and Blanche doesn't give a damn about that. And this Judge Sullivan does care about that. He is pissed off. Be very clear about this. He is not happy with Blanche. He's talked about the fact that he should be held in contempt. That's been insinuated. So today is the day, and he's going to have to provide these documents. I think Blanche just thinks if you ignore a problem, it's going to go away.
Well, that's always been Trump's philosophy, whether it was COVID or whether it's inflation or affordability or Iran.
Run out the clock. That's their strategy.
But in his desperation to stay in power now, I think one of their next moves is to start labeling Democrats as communists so that they can assert that if Democrats get in power, they're going to destroy the country. And believe it or not, they are actually finding a little bit of a foundation for that. They're doing this by looking at a group called the Democratic Socialists of America, which would be an independent party, except that they realize that independents and libertarians and minority parties never get any votes in the country. So they're linking themselves to the Democratic Party, even though they really don't represent what the Democratic Party represents. Now, their co-chair is a woman named Megan Romer. She appeared on Fox News this week and was interviewed by Shannon Bream. Bream asked her about their policy positions and called for what sounded like radical and even a communist agenda, like abolishing the Senate or ending national borders or shutting down all our prisons. And of course, Republicans are going to be pounding on this, trying to suggest that she's speaking for the Democratic Party.
We're going to put up on the screen a few of the things that are part of your platform. And I want to ask you, just give me sort of a true or false on these. Abolish the Senate.
True.
Okay. Replace the presidency and Supreme Court as we now know them.
Yep.
Abolish ICE.
Absolutely.
Abolish borders and give amnesty to anyone currently in the U.S. illegally.
As a long-term plan, yep.
Defund the Pentagon.
Absolutely.
Abolish prisons, at least in large part.
Yeah, again, that as part of a long-term program, yeah.
Okay, so no prisons. Government or public ownership of most large corporations.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you see, she's not speaking for the Democratic Party, but she's going to be labeled as presenting Democratic positions because a lot of those things unexplained sound like communism, right? They really do. Their platform is titled "Workers Deserve More," and it outlines a massive structural overhaul of the government alongside expanded socialist and economic policies. Some of them sound great. Some of them could never be functional, would never be accepted by the public. But what they're trying to do is shift institutional and economic power from corporations to the working people who make the money for the corporations in the first place. So, they want to eliminate the Senate entirely and create a unicameral legislature because what they assert is that the Senate is really a holdover from English governance, where they had the House of Lords who allowed the upper class and the wealthy people in England to control the government through that house, right? And so that came into the Constitution when this government was formed. Actually, a Senate was in the Roman Empire, right? They had a Senate. And so the founders were sort of plagiarizing other ideologies from governments and putting them in here. And she's saying, no, this is obsolete. It should be just a representation of the people through the House of Representatives. And she even says that the president and Supreme Court should be replaced with an executive and judiciary chosen by and subordinate to Congress. So we wouldn't even vote for the president under their system. Well, of course, that's not going to happen because it's too ingrained in our society. She wants to implement proportional representation and ranked choice voting and transform the two-party system into a multi-party system, more like they have in a lot of European governments. But one thing that they're going to get flack on is the concept of a complete rewriting of the Constitution, which I think would lead to more of a theocracy if we ever had a constitutional convention. It would just completely restructure the Constitution and alter our liberties and our freedoms in ways that would really make the original Constitution unrecognizable. But now here's something I think is a good idea. Overturn Citizens United. Eliminate the lobbyists and the dark money and establish publicly financed elections.
Yeah. And
What's wrong with that?
Much of what they suggest, I fully agree with. I don't have, number one, this garbage about this is communism. We've debunked that, last month or so. Nothing about this has anything to do with communism, which is government ownership of private property.
But that's what they're calling for here in the economic and labor reform. Seize and transfer the largest corporations and essential utilities to public and democratic control. That's where they're going to go after them. And the Republicans are going to say, see, that is communism, because it gets rid of investor-owned businesses and corporations and utilities and oil companies.
My point is this, though. Look, it's good to have a good debate about some of these issues. For example, you say abolish prisons. Okay, that's never going to happen. But this country does imprison way too many people. There's no question about that. There are people in prison that should not be in prison. So I have no problem questioning that. You mentioned Citizens United. That it's a corrupt financing system right now. Abolish the Electoral College. Like the Electoral College should be abolished.
But I don't understand that one, though, Kevin, because if the president's appointed through the Congress, you wouldn't have any purpose for an electoral college, because all it does is elect the president and vice president.
Well,
so it kind of would go away on its own if that happened.
You've had presidents be sworn in who didn't win the vote. That's never made any sense to me.
The popular vote.
The popular vote is the vote. I mean, this electoral college gives way too much weight to the smaller states. It's an anachronism that maybe had made sense 250 years ago. It doesn't make any sense today. So, the wealth taxes should go up. We've talked about, Gary and Ed, one easy way to solve the Social Security problem is to increase the cap on the Social Security tax, which stops at what, 175 right now?
186 now.
So, but there's no reason to stop that. So
it's true.
My point, I'm not going to apologize for the Democratic Socialists of America's proposals. I think these are worthy discussions. These Republicans, their biggest enemy is themselves. They're going to hang themselves by what their corruption and ineptitude in the last 2 years. I'm not going to sit here and get defensive about a part of our Democratic Party that has more socialistic, progressive views than maybe the other part. That's an internal debate we can have. But there's ICE should be abolished. It's a horrible agency. It's trampled on the constitutional rights of this country. It's led to people dying in custody. We need to be banging on the table saying these things are wrong. So I'm not going to apologize for these suggestions. Doesn't mean I need to agree with all of them.
I'm going to list three that I think are really going to be ammunition for the conservatives. Okay, mandating a shortened standard work week with no loss in pay. That inevitably is going to lead to inflation, because a worker can produce less in a 32-hour week than he can in a 40-hour week. If they're paid the same, that means it's going to trigger inflation.
Not if AI does what they say it's going to do. It's going to make people, employees even more productive. The ones that don't lose their jobs.
Other countries in Europe has some higher standards of living. They don't make you work 40 hours a week and have 2 weeks off a year. They have the entire month of August off. Other countries have had higher standards of living and not had the workers work as hard.
Yeah, another one they're going to jump on is providing full amnesty for all undocumented immigrants currently in the U.S. and extend voting rights to non-citizens. Now, the conservatives are going to jump all over that and say,
you
stupid.
Can't.
It is.
That's stupid.
I know.
But Reagan gave amnesty to all of them that were here, and he was the patron saint of the Republican Party.
That doesn't offend me. I don't give a damn what they think. They don't have what have they done but trample on the constitutional rights? They're bombing, killing these fishermen out at sea. So I don't want to hear one whimper from these conservatives. They're their own worst enemy. We're going to take over, and I don't give a damn what they think.
Well, let's talk about the Senate, because the Senate is where bills go to die. It's a minority controlled institution. And, when you look at the fact that all these flyover states, these red states that don't have any people in them, have 2 senators each. Wyoming has 2 senators, and yet California, that has 40 million people, has 2 senators, and they have the same vote when you get there. It's insane.
Yeah, there's states with 2 senators who have a smaller population than Hillsborough County.
Well, that's why
County.
Dakota was split into 2 states. Right?
Yeah.
It was to create 2 more Senate seats.
And then you layer on top of that the filibuster, which isn't in the Constitution. This is just a rule that the Senate came up with 129 years after the Constitution was passed, and it was used primarily to keep civil rights legislation beat down. And
wow.
So they required a 2/3 vote of senators, and then dialed that back to 60. But you can't get 60 votes now for anything, and there were more than. It's been used in the last 15 years more than it was used in the previous 200. So, I mean, it's just ridiculous that we have the filibuster. It prevents anything from getting passed. And then the other problem that really needs to be addressed is court reform for the Supreme Court, because they have, as we talked about earlier, they have become this political arm. They're unelected. They have a lifetime term. Those could all be changed. You could have a term of 18 years is what I'm hearing. That would allow each president to be able to appoint somebody. The Democrats haven't appointed a chief justice since 1946.
Wow.
So
let me quickly ask you, though, that there's the other definition of filibuster is when somebody gets up and just keeps yakking for 20 hours.
Yeah, they changed that too.
What is that all about? What is even the
Used to
purpose
be you
of
had
that?
to have a speaking filibuster where you had to get up and speak until you couldn't stand anymore. You had to go to the bathroom, and it would be a way to close the debate. When you finally run out of gas, we're going to now take a vote on it. Well, instead, they've changed the rules so that you can just say, I declare a filibuster. And you don't have to do anything other than it's basically one senator can get up there and derail anything. So
so what happens when he makes that declaration?
Until you get 60 people that say, no, we want to have the vote, it's stuck and bills die. So things get passed in the House. And where, there is better representation, not great because of all the gerrymandering that's been done. I read this week where there's only like 22 seats out of 435 that are even competitive. The rest of them have all been gerrymandered to the point where unless they have a primary, and lose the primary, they're going to win the general. Now, we don't know what this latest round of redrawing the lines in the middle of the, between the census is going to do this year with that. But still, Congress is pretty well set. It's hard for somebody to run against an incumbent and ever win. And that really is a result of the gerrymandering, and we've got to fix that too.
But for example, it says here defund the military. Oh my God. Look, I came from a military background with my father, but look what's happening in Iran. Look, Hegseth goes, he wants over $1 trillion. Well, he wants a blank check. So we should be questioning the military. Now, defunding, I'm not saying we defund it, but we should just give them a blank check.
Right.
I mean, what's happening now? I'm not going to sit here and worry about what these MAGA Republicans are thinking about what we're suggesting when they have put us in the worst position this country has ever been in 250 years. So I don't want to give them what they think. We gave them the reins 2 years ago, and they ran this into off the side of the road, and they're going to pay a price for it. I love how these Republicans like Trump, they're in a different world right now. They don't even understand what's going to happen in November. And there's going to be a big change when we take over at least one house. That we will take over the House. And I think we haven't talked much recently about the Senate, but Iowa, Maine, Alaska, Texas, North Carolina, those are all in play. And we need a net 4.
Well, a few things I think that the Democratic party would support is steeper taxes on the billionaires and the corporations, guarantee of Medicare for all, and free universal child care, maybe, and tuition-free public college. So people don't need to graduate from college facing $100,000 in debt, and allow all individuals, even people with criminal convictions like Donald Trump, who has 34 felony convictions, the right to vote, as well as defending transgender rights and banning sex discrimination. Those things are advancing the freedom of citizenships that should be inherent in our country.
Well, let me. We're throwing out a lot here. Let's talk about a couple of those things. We amended our state constitution in Florida to give felons the right to vote. It was debated. And again, as we know in Florida, which no other state I think requires, it's a 60%. It's a super majority, very hard to get. We did it. So what did the legislature do? They came in and they added on requirements to that. Oh no, you got to pay your costs, you've got to pay your penalties, which often can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. So the legislatures found a way to get around what the citizens of this state wanted.
Yeah.
And one of the things you've emphasized quite a bit, and I agree with you on, is universal health care does work in other countries. Why can't we in this country? I think that's one of the points that the Democrat socialists are trying to make. Why can't it work here? We have a system that's broken in terms of medical care in this country, and we can't seem to fix it. But it works in Canada. It works in Europe. It does work.
Of course it does, and it would cost us half as much per capita and give us health care for everybody. Kevin, I think the foundation of all these ideas comes from Bernie Sanders. Listen to some of the things he says. Today, the top 1% of Americans own more wealth than the bottom 93%. One man, Elon Musk, who's worth maybe up to $1 trillion, has more wealth than the bottom 53% of American households combined. Last year alone, after receiving the largest tax break in American history from Donald Trump, 938 billionaires became richer by $1.5 trillion. And at the same time, what he says repeatedly is 60% of Americans are working paycheck to paycheck, which means they can't save any money. They can't get ahead. The average American worker is making almost $20 a week less today in real terms than 53 years ago. And nearly 85 million Americans are uninsured or underinsured. Last year, after Trump gave corporate America a tax break of more than $900 billion, Tesla, SpaceX, Palantir, and Ticketmaster paid zero in federal income taxes. And those corporations combined are worth $3.5 trillion, earning over $17 billion in profits and paid nothing. So the real foundation of these ideologies that they're advancing is that the wealthy corporations and the billionaires who get all that wealth because they live in this country need to be putting more back into the system and letting the working people who allow these corporations to operate and put in the time and effort to get them to work should be better compensated. And if that's communism, then how did we function back after post World War II when we had unions, when we had single wage earners that could keep an entire household afloat and buy a new car every 2 years and pay for the house and take a vacation and have a stable retirement? We did it with and had the strongest economy in the world. And now we're saying, oh, we can't do that or we'll all die. But,
well, it's certainly not communism. That needs to just be ignored. That's just a ridiculous argument that they make. What's happened again, though, the middle class is being narrowed and it's destabilizing this country, Ed. But what do you see? You see conduct that's contrary to the values of this country. You see Trump and his insider buddies making millions and billions off crypto. You see them making money illegally off insider information. You see these tax cuts for the rich, which you just mentioned. So none of those things encourages someone to say, well, if I just go to work every day and work hard, I can buy a house. The average age of the first homeowner now is 40.
40.
That's middle age, Ed.
I know.
And those aren't trivial issues. After World War II.
Which means in a 30-year mortgage, they're going to be into their retirement years before they can pay the house off.
Oh, and concepts like these investment funds buying up the homes, which increases the price of the house, increases the rents. The housing bill that passed is attempting to address that. But the point is, what you're seeing happening from government is contrary to the values that this country was based on, and it's just pummeling the middle class. It's pummeling the poor. The rich get richer and the poor get poor. Are those the values that we want to espouse?
What we need is the Republican Party of 1956, because their policy, their platform, sounds like a Democratic policy platform. They wanted to provide federal assistance to low-income people. They wanted to protect Social Security. They wanted to provide asylum for refugees. They wanted to extend the minimum wage. They wanted to improve unemployment benefits so that it covers more people. They wanted to strengthen labor laws so workers could more easily join a union. They wanted to assure equal pay for equal work regardless of sex. And they wanted to keep that 90% top tax rate that Eisenhower had set forth. So, that's what we need back, folks, not this crap that you're being spoon-fed for culture wars.
Well, it's time for us to break for national and international news from America's poster child for fake news, Fox Network News. Back in the second hour of The Voice of Reason, when we'll be looking at the day in the life of Sue the Republican and how her days go, and a selection of the new dean of Florida International University that drives the final nail into the coffin of meritocracy in Trump's America. Stay with us on the Tan Talk Radio Network for The Voice of Reason. We'll return in just a few minutes with more of the issues that the conservatives never want you to hear about.
WTAN, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
Listen.
Rebounding from the biggest sell-off of the year. I'm Dave Anthony, Fox News. The Dow up 360 points the morning after plunging more than 1,100. The NASDAQ gaining over 600. And there are two updates to the economy. There was less growth in the second quarter, just 1.5%, down from 2.1 in the first 3 months of the year. Fox's Ginny Casola has the other update.
Inflation cooled in June. The PCE price index found prices declined 0.1% last month. For the year ending in June, inflation came in at 3.7%, which was an improvement to 3.3%. The PCE report for June was compiled before the recent rise in crude oil prices that followed renewed tensions in the Middle East.
Speaking of that, Iran has again launched an attack targeting American troops in Jordan. But like the first one, the missiles were shot down, and the U.S. military retaliated for that initial attack last night.
U.S. forces unleashed heavy airstrikes against the regime. Dozens of targets were hit, including IRGC, military command centers, drone and missile facilities inside of Iran, along with remaining maritime capabilities. Earlier in the day, President Trump told Fox News, "We're going to beat the effing S out of them."
Fox's Trey Yingst in Tel Aviv, the day after another funeral for late Senator Lindsey Graham in South Carolina, where he was laid to rest. His sister, Darlene Graham, who was appointed to the Senate to serve out her brother's term, has put out her first campaign video running for that Senate seat.
Thank you all for your prayers. They provided strength through an incredibly difficult time. I'm honored to serve South Carolina and grateful for President Trump's endorsement, and I'll work hard every day to earn it.
The special Republican Senate primary in South Carolina to replace Lindsey Graham as the GOP nominee in November will be August 11th. In the Senate today, a committee will not vote as planned on acting Attorney General Todd Blanche. It was postponed as two Republicans consider voting against approving Blanche for full Senate consideration, putting the nomination in jeopardy. America's listening to Fox News.
Fox News Books has boasted a host of bestsellers. Now, Fox News Books enters the world of podcasting. This season, the Fox News Books podcast presents The Miracles Among Us. For its first season, Fox News Books will present this special podcast brought to you by the author, Fox News senior medical analyst, Dr. Mark Siegel. The Miracles Among Us on the Fox News Books podcast. Listen and follow now at foxnewspodcasts.com or wherever you download podcasts.
Hello, everyone. This is Ainsley Earhart. Thank you for joining me for the 52-episode podcast series, The Life of Jesus.
Neil McDonough portrays Jesus. Stacey Keach, Sean Astin, Michael York, and Kristen Bell provide the voices for some of Jesus's notable followers. A listening experience that will provide hope, comfort, and understanding of the greatest story ever told, the life of Jesus.
Make sure to spread the word.
Listen and follow now at foxnewspodcasts.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
This is Downtown Dave. How would you like to be able to promote yourself, your business, or someone else's business for less than the cost of one 60-second commercial on many Tampa Bay radio stations? Here's the deal. You can have your own 1-hour radio program on the Tan Talk Network for less than the cost of one 60-second announcement on many Tampa Bay stations. Your program will be on 2 Tampa Bay radio stations and will cover 4 million people in Florida, plus worldwide on the internet in both audio and video. And you'll have a web link for your business on the Tan Talk 1340 website. We provide the producer, the state-of-the-art equipment, free production of commercials, and much more. Check it out today. Call Lola O'Brien, the Irish Hawaiian, at 727-510-7622. That's 510-7622. Call Lola O'Brien now, 727-510-7622. Call now and your 1-hour radio program can start tomorrow. Call 510-7622 for Lola O'Brien, the Irish Hawaiian, at the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Tune in to the Shrink and Wrap Show here on Tan Talk Radio. Our stories and our topics will include, but are not limited to, everyday issues. We're here for you, for our listeners. We want to know what's important to you. So again, don't miss us on Tan Talk Radio. Tune in again, Shrink and Wrap Show. We'll see you then.
The Shrink and Wrap Show at its new time, Thursdays from 4 to 5 p.m. here on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Hi, I'm Dawn Reese with the Dawn Reese Show, most powerful names in entertainment, every Thursday at 5 p.m. I have so many different segments I'm so excited to share with you, from miracle stories to celebrity interviews with Hollywood connections to travel to local business, promoting your business on the air with me, an amazing opportunity to grow your business. Tune in to the Tan Talk Radio Network, 106.1 FM on Thursdays, 5 p.m. with me, Dawn Reese.
Hey everyone, it is Brandy Joy with the Brandy Joy Joyride. Feel free to hop in and have a good time with us every Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. This show is brought to you by One Unit, dedicated to bringing people together, letting your voices be heard, and of course we're here to entertain you, upbuild you, inspire you, and even hear from you. So every Thursday, tune in to 106.1 FM, Brandy Joy Joyride, and we will hear from you and let's have some fun.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
Now, the voice of reason continues here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Here again is your host for today's program, Ed Golly.
We just emailed it to you. Okay, with me in the Tan Talk studio, my co-host, both attorneys. First, our senior legal advisor is former Circuit Judge Kevin Carey, and our senior political consultant, Gary Gibbons. I want to just follow up on what we were talking about in the first hour about how so many billionaires have so much interest in our political system as a result of Citizens United. Susan Collins, running for her, is it 5th term as a senator in Maine, who said...
Yeah, she promised she'd run for 2 terms when she first ran.
Well, the Maine Monitor reveals that nearly, now sit down for this, guys, 100 billionaires and their spouses have poured almost 10 million balloons into her campaign since the start of 2025. Not a single one of those billionaire donors are residents of the state of Maine. What does that tell us? Collectively, the group of nearly the 100 billionaires and spouses donated $9.8 million to the network, representing a third of what groups supporting Collins raised from all donors. And the majority of the billionaire donations to Collins in this cycle are from billionaires who made their money in alternative investments, hedge funds, private equity. Other billionaire donors include Palantir co-founder Alex Karp, Melinda French Gates, ex-wife of Bill Gates, New England Patriot owners Robert Kraft is his name. The billionaire donors supporting Collins have a net worth of $888 billion, or nearly 9 times, check that, Maine's entire economic output of 2025. And other billionaires have donated large sums to the Senate Leadership Fund as well, which is a PAC, right? PAC, including casino magnate Miriam Adelson, who donated $30 million, and Elon Musk, who gave $10 million.
Well, Citizens United. Citizens United was a disastrous decision, and it's led to corruption in the political process, and it needs to be changed. And the Supreme Court shouldn't be making law, as you were alluding to earlier, Gary. Yeah. But you look at the main race with Susan Collins, and she portrays herself as somewhat of a moderate who can, and because Maine is not a very red state, but she portrays herself as, I can push back to Trump, but she hasn't. If you look at her record, she's very much followed in line with MAGA. So for her to convey that I'm not really a red Republican, because that's what Maine is, and I think she's got a problem in this race.
But doesn't that mean that I'm right when I assert that the Republican Party represents government of the rich, by the rich, and for the rich? And they want these senators in power who are going to continue to give them these tax breaks, so we go deeper and deeper in debt instead of them paying what would probably be beyond their fair share, but nevertheless, it's what they need to pay, because they have the opportunity to make all that money because they live in this country and they need to support it.
Yeah, and she's the chair of the Appropriations Committee, and a lot of those billionaires, the Palantirs and others, all have gotten contracts from the Trump administration. So they're in it for the money. They are, they know that if she stays in power, she'll continue to approve, $1.5 trillion Pentagon budgets, for example, and that sort of stuff. So it's no wonder that we know now who she works for. It isn't the people of Maine. It's the billionaire class.
Yeah, and she's tried to have it both ways, and she can't. And I think she's going to have a problem. I think this is going to be her toughest race. We keep thinking she'll lose, and she won rather easily 6 years ago, but she could lose. I mean, the polls are showing that she's got a serious problem, just like incumbents in some of the other states do. And you mentioned Byron Donalds in Florida, and that's a competitive race. We've had his opponent in here, David Jolly, speaking on our show. And the problem these Republicans have is that you have a very unpopular president, and there are very strong reasons for that. You've got a very bad economy. You've got a very unpopular war. And so that blue wave will just continue. And Donalds has a lot more money than Jolly has, but right now you've got an unpopular Republican Party.
Again, Donalds is, and last night I saw, because David Jolly had been running ads showing that Donalds was pro data centers. And Jolly said, when I got into this race, I thought that homeowners insurance was going to be the biggest decision, the big issue for voters. But now it's data centers. Nobody wants those things. But guess what? Donalds has received millions of dollars from these data center people that want to promote him. And so now he's coming out and he's trying to gaslight everybody in commercials, saying, oh, no, we're gonna make sure they're regulated, and I'm gonna be the first one to make sure that happens. And it's all BS. I mean, he knows where his bread is buttered, and it's those people that have funded his campaign.
One difference between him and Collins is that at least he has a Florida billionaire giving him money. Hedge fund manager Ken Griffin from Miami gave him $10 million, but he's still getting out-of-state money too. Pennsylvania billionaire Jeff Yass is his second highest donor, handing over 7.5 million skins in March. Those two billionaires alone make up about a fifth of his $92 million war chest, which his campaign has been using to blanket the idiot box and digital airwaves with ads promoting his background and his stance on data centers, as you were talking about, Gary. And he does have a felony arrest in his background, so he's got that box checked. A lot of people.
Well, he wasn't convicted, but he was
I know.
arrested. You're right.
Yeah.
But
felony
again,
arrest.
and David Jolly mentioned this when he was our guest a few months ago. We know the fact he hasn't really had a strong background of raising money, but the point he made, which was valid, if there's a wave, that money will come, and if there's not, it won't. But I think what's happening is he's a very likable candidate. His primary opponent had to withdraw because of medical reasons from Orlando. So, people are not happy right now with their current state of affairs. And as you mentioned, Gary, they see a government, not just at a national level, but even in Florida, that is not addressing the concerns that the average person has.
Yeah, Republicans have run the state of Florida for more than 30 years, complete control of the governor's mansion and both houses. And they are example one of why we shouldn't reelect them, because everything in the state is broken, and they have been in complete control of it. So, wake up, people.
Yeah. So Gary, let's talk about a day in the life of Sue Republican.
Yeah,
this is a real trip.
Sue gets up at 6 in the morning. She fills her coffee pot with water to prepare her morning coffee. The water's clean and good because some tree-hugging liberal fought for minimum water quality standards. With her first swallow of coffee, she takes her daily medication. Her medications are safe to take because some stupid commie liberal fought to ensure their safety and that they would work as advertised.
Yeah, like 100 years ago, you could still sell snake oil, right?
Yeah.
There was no regulation.
Right.
Go on.
All but $10 of her medications are paid by her employer's medical plan because some liberal union workers fought their employers for pay and medical insurance. Now Sue gets it too. She prepares her morning breakfast, which is bacon and eggs. Sue's bacon is safe to eat because some girly man liberal fought for laws to regulate the meatpacking industry. In the shower, Sue reaches for her shampoo. Her bottle is properly labeled with each ingredient and its amount, the amounts and its contents, because some crybaby liberal fought for her right to know that what she was putting on her body and how much it contained. She dresses, she walks outside and takes a deep breath. The air she breathes is clean because some environmentalist wacko liberal fought for laws to stop industries from polluting our air.
And to advance green energy like wind turbines and electric cars, right?
Yeah.
What a terrible thing that is.
So she walks to the subway station for her government subsidized ride to work. It saves her considerable money in parking and transportation fees because some fancy pants liberal fought for affordable public transportation, which gives everyone the opportunity to be a contributor. Sue begins her workday. She has a good job with excellent pay, medical benefits, retirement, paid holidays, and vacation because some lazy liberal union members fought and died for those working standards. Sue's employer pays these standards because Sue's employer doesn't want his employees to call the union. If Sue's hurt on the job or becomes unemployed, she gets a workers' compensation or unemployment check because some stupid liberal didn't think she should lose her home just because of her temporary misfortune. It's noon, and now Sue needs to make a bank deposit so she can pay some bills. Sue's deposit is federally insured by the FSLIC because some godless liberal wanted to protect Sue's money from unscrupulous bankers who ruined the banking system before the Great Depression.
I read that 1929 about the Depression. I just could not believe the numbers of banks that would go out under in a single day, and all the people lost their money. Which is why even after the Second World War, people were still keeping their life savings in a mattress or something. Nobody thinks like that anymore. You don't worry about it anymore because of those dumb liberals that wanted safe banking.
You just take it for granted.
It's regulations.
Yeah, my uncle tells the story of calling my great grandfather called the family together and said, everybody pulled money out of your pocket and put it on the table, and they had $47 for the entire family, and said, "This is what we have." So
why?
Because everything was lost in the bank.
Wow,
everything that was in the bank, and the law firm. The bank was the law firm's biggest client, and all of their money and all of their business was in the so thank you for those crazy liberals who have done this. Now Sue, back to Sue, she has to pay her Fannie Mae underwritten mortgage and her below market federal student loan because some elitist liberal decided that Sue and the government would be better off if she was educated and earned more money over her lifetime. Sue's now home from work. She plans visiting her father this evening at his farm home in the country. She gets in her car for the drive. Her car is among the safest in the world because some American-hating liberal fought for car safety standards. She arrives.
That was Ralph Nader, wasn't it?
Yeah. Unsafe at any speed, right? The Corvair. She arrives at her childhood home. Her generation was the third to live in the house financed by the Farmers Home Administration because bankers didn't want to make rural loans. The house didn't have electricity until some big government liberal stuck his nose where it didn't belong and demanded rural electrification. She's happy to see her father, who's now retired. Her father lives on Social Security and a union pension because some wine-drinking, cheese-eating liberal made sure he could take care of himself, and so Sue wouldn't have to take care of him. Sue gets back in her car for the ride home and turns on the talk radio show. The radio host keeps saying that liberals are bad and conservatives are good, while the host champions deregulation and politicians who advocate for it. He doesn't mention that Republicans have fought against every protection and benefit that Sue enjoyed throughout her day. Sue agrees. We don't need those big government liberals ruining our lives. After all, I'm self-made. I believe everyone should take care of themselves just like I have. So this was something I saw on Facebook, and I don't know who the author was, but damn, it was right on.
It shows that we just take these regulations for granted these days and assume that if they were eliminated, that corporations and banks would all advance those same protections, but they wouldn't, because they would be looking for the maximum profit. And if that comes by cheating the consumer or cheating the employer or cheating the pension plan, they're going to do it. That's why regulations are so important. You probably owe your life to regulations because of the safer products that we either consume or drive around in or whatever.
Well, and that's one of the dangers now with Trump and what's happened with gutting these government agencies and these regulations. And for some reason, these MAGA think that regulations is a dirty word as opposed to protection.
And they say they kill jobs, but they really don't, because you need people to make sure the regulations are being carried out. So those people get hired. We've had some train derailments lately, and they're telling us, well, it's because we don't have enough brakemen that know if something's going wrong with the train. There's only one or two guys running a train that's 2 miles long. Well, if you regulate more people on the train so that you can spot problems before they turn into a major league derailment, that's going to increase employment, right? Not decrease it. So it's just buzzword nonsense to say that it's always going to cost jobs because it costs more. And in spite of all those regulations, we still have the strongest economy in the world. How can this be?
Well, there's a bubble that's going to burst with the rich getting richer, and it's going to be either that, or scandal, which is, remember the Enron. All of what's happening is destabilizing our economy, and you're going to have all these angry, people that just won't put up with it either. So, but there's going to be accountability. You mentioned this a little bit earlier, Gary, at one level. There's going to be accountability. There's been illegal activity that's been occurring on a regular basis, almost on a daily basis with this administration, Ed.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's insider trading, speculation, the tax code does need to change, and it's just wrong, and it needs to be accounted for. And the Democrats are, to their credit now, I think they smell victory. They're now coming out much more aggressively. The Speaker of the Speaker of the House. The Democrat Speaker of the House he's gotten, Hakeem Jeffries has gotten very aggressive the last few months.
Before we get to Todd Blanche, I'll give you an example of what you're talking about. Trump continuing to prove he's an innovator in the field of corruption.
That he is.
The Trump-owned social media platform Truth Social will begin to sell subscriptions for faster access to his posts. He's selling those subscriptions for $100,000 a month, and they're being marketed to large trading firms so that they can get in on his decisions in advance. And that's simply insider trading for sale. And this is what people like Anna Luna is railing about, says we shouldn't allow this in Congress. But she doesn't say the president shouldn't be able to do it. I wonder why. And he's just doing it openly now. And these companies are going to decide that they have no choice but to buy into this, or their competitors will beat them out, right?
Gary,
unbelievable.
When your uncle Sam Gibbons was in Congress for many, many years, I'm sure he didn't do it with the thought he was going to get rich. He got a pension and he had a decent salary. It's just when I was a judge, you generally take a pay cut to become a judge, but you have a pension and you're doing it for the right reasons. So whether it's Democrat or Republican, there needs to be some legislation to limit. That really shouldn't be a partisan issue.
And talking about regulations real quickly, there's a screw worm that is infecting cattle out in Texas that we used to have a federal agency that monitored this thing. And of course, Trump got rid of it. And now the farmers out there that are raising cattle are freaking out because the screw worm is having a devastating effect on the populations of their herd. So, these things do matter, and these regulations and these government agencies that we've set up are there for a purpose. And when you just go in and decide to flip the light switch off, it has huge consequences.
Oh yeah. And it doesn't solve the national debt or the deficit to do that. These are not.
They haven't saved a penny. They've spent more this year than last year.
I mean,
after Doge.
This is nothing that's conservative. As George Will said, I didn't leave the party left me. But when they don't even talk about balanced budgets and they talk, this deficit is hemorrhaging.
They wait till the Democrats get in power, and then they're pulling their hair out saying, oh, we've got to get this spending under control. Yeah, well,
you mentioned last week, $50 trillion is not.
It's not over the horizon.
That's exactly
right in our face. Yeah, we're going to get there.
But this party, the Republican Party, was based on fiscal discipline. Mm-hmm. And this is anything but fiscal discipline.
Right. Kevin, Carey, talk to us about Todd Blanche now.
Well, Todd Blanche, who's the acting attorney general, our good friend who's in trouble we talked a few minutes ago about he's ignoring his obligations under the Epstein statute that was signed by Trump last November. Today was supposed to be the vote in the Senate Judiciary Committee. There is a 12-10 majority in favor of Republicans, so it only takes one Republican to stop him in his tracks because all 10 Democrats are voting against him. And there's two Republicans, John Cornyn of Texas and Tom Tillis of North Carolina. Cornyn, who Trump went after and primaried him. Tillis is leaving, I guess, somewhat on his own, but I think Trump had something to do with that. But the point is that they're both demanding something before they're going to vote yes. And the vote was delayed today. We talked about this a little bit last week. Blanche will not, he said in his testimony that under that whole scheme, which is a whole other discussion we could have about the federal judge who criticized this whole scheme about there being this slush fund of 1776, $1.8 billion. And as we talked about last week, Blanche telling the Senate Judiciary Committee, we're not going to pursue that. And Cornyn said, we'll put it in writing. And Tillis and Cornyn have to this date are saying we can't get from the DOJ and from Blanche it in writing, which is it's no mystery to me why that is. Trump doesn't want it in writing. And so the Senate Judiciary Committee, chaired by our good friend Chuck Grassley, who needs to retire yesterday, has delayed the vote from today. So it's still in limbo.
And you mark my words, who's going to get the first $1 billion of that trust fund if it ever goes through? It's going to be Crooked Donald, because he's going to say, I have been more persecuted by the government than everybody else put together. He'll still have plenty of money to dole out to the January 6th rioters.
Yeah, there are 5 commissioners that are to be appointed to manage that fund. And I already said previously on a show that it would be Don Jr., Eric, Ivanka, and maybe Blanche and maybe the president himself. And the president can remove anybody he doesn't like. So, as soon as he's going to put in the first claim for money. You're right. Yeah.
So the issue from politics, Ed and Gary, is whether, Cornyn and Tillis have said they want to get to yes, is the quote they made, which I was not a big fan of that comment, because that suggests that they accept something less than what they're demanding. Yeah. But it's at a gridlock right now, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. They're going to vote yes. They always do. Until they show me they have a backbone, they don't.
And if you're John Cornyn, who you did everything right, you were a legitimate senator. You weren't just a criminal like the guy that beat him, the Attorney General of Texas. Paxton is just a criminal. He doesn't care about these. Of course, that's what Trump's a criminal. He doesn't care about what the law is. But you've done everything right. Why don't you go out with some dignity and say, damn it, I'm not playing this game anymore.
Yeah. Usually when you go to a confirmation hearing, the person hasn't been in office yet. And so they're promising that they're not going to do X, Y, and Z. But in this case, we've seen this guy. He's done he's ignored court orders. He's created a slush fund. He gave the president and his family unlimited, giveaways on their tax liabilities. All of that stuff is just completely off the chain. And why would anybody vote for him? But, I think they will.
Indifferent to corruption. Well, it's 30 minutes past the hour, which is time for us to pause for a quick break here on the Tan Talk Radio Network, Voice of Reason with Gary Gibbons, Kevin Carey, I should say, and me, Ed Golly. Now, when we come back, we're going to hear about a remarkable new advance in the ability for Americans to kill each other even more efficiently than we do now, along with more of the issues the conservatives never want you to hear about.
Hey everyone, it is Brandy Joy with the Brandy Joy Joyride. Feel free to hop in and have a good time with us every Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. This show is brought to you by One Unit, dedicated to bringing people together, letting your voices be heard. And of course, we're here to entertain you, upbuild you, inspire you, and even hear from you. It's every Thursday. Tune in to 106.1 FM, Brandy Joy Joyride, and we will hear from you and let's have some fun.
You're listening to the Voice of Reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Well, today, The Daily Show's host, Desi Lydic, is puzzled about the disagreement over the biggest threat to our country.
Communism is the single greatest threat to our country and its history, including even World War I and World War II, Pearl Harbor, 9/11. I think it's the greatest threat that I've ever seen to our country.
That's right. That's right. Communism is the greatest threat to our country, even more than the looming threat of World War I. That is what the president believes, although I think someone else might disagree with him.
The threat that we have, the biggest threat, is nuclear war. I think that the border is the biggest threat to this country. Our biggest threat remains the sick, sinister, and evil people from within our country. The weaponization of law enforcement is the greatest threat. Our biggest threat to democracy is stupid people.
Anybody want to follow up on that?
It's like drinking from a fire hose, isn't it?
It's,
Unbelievable.
it's just, it's just shooting from the hip. There's no consistency or anything. It's just whatever the threat du jour is the biggest threat ever.
But I blame, as I always say, I blame the enablers, the people that enable that crazy man to continue with lack of any cogency in any policy, public policy.
Well, let's move on to this week's rant, where former Department of Justice pardon attorney Liz Oyer lets us know about a new way for Americans to kill each other even faster.
The Department of Justice is making it possible to buy guns online and have them shipped directly to your door. And there is one person who stands to profit tremendously from this. His name is Donald Trump Jr. Right now, you can't just buy a gun online and have it sent to your home. Online gun sellers are only allowed to ship to licensed federal firearm dealers. That means you can buy a gun online, but you still have to go physically pick it up in person from a licensed dealer. The dealer is required to check your ID, run a background check, and complete a whole bunch of paperwork before they let you walk out the door with a gun. But all that is about to change. DOJ has announced a new rule that will allow online gun sellers to ship directly to customers. It will make buying a gun as easy as shopping on Amazon.com. And here's an interesting coincidence. Donald Trump Jr. has a company that markets itself as the Amazon of guns. It's called Grab a Gun. Their ticker symbol is PEW. Don Jr. owns 300,000 shares of this company. He sits on the board and he took the company public last year. It's almost as though he knew this rule change was coming. Grab a Gun is now boasting to investors that it is, quote, uniquely positioned to capitalize on this rule change. DOJ is actually rolling back dozens of gun regulations, including a separate rule that prohibits sending handguns via the U.S. Postal Service. Right now, handguns can only be shipped by FedEx or UPS, but that's about to change. Experts are saying these changes will make it much easier for guns to end up in the wrong hands. But that concern, of course, is secondary to profits. And Don Jr. is not the only person who stands to profit. The acting Attorney General Todd Blanche is also getting in on the action. Blanche's in-laws run a company called Checkmate Industries, which sells firearm magazines. Considering that Blanche has final sign-off on these rules, that sure looks like a conflict of interest. Blanche and others are saying that these rule changes are not about profit. They are about protecting our constitutional right to bear arms. They are saying we have a constitutional right to buy a gun by mail. So let me just point out that we also have a constitutional right to vote. Yet Donald Trump believes we should not be able to do that by mail. He is making it easier to buy a gun than to cast your vote. Don't try to make it make sense. It doesn't.
Lawyer again speaks truth.
Yeah.
What she said.
Isn't that remarkable? You can't vote by mail, but you can get a gun by mail. It's just crazy. I mean, the middle name of this country is violence, isn't it? The United Violent States of America, between what we do to ourselves and other countries. It's unbelievable. I want to talk about what's going on at Florida International University. An item came out just this week. The interim law school dean wasn't just passed over as a finalist during the university's national search. He didn't even make the committee's top 20 candidates, yet FIU leaders appointed him anyway. Now, after the finalist interviews, the provost declared the search failed. Months later, she and FIU President Jeanette Nunez, who was the former first lieutenant governor, under Ron DeSantis, named this guy named Daniel Epstein, best known for representing our convicted felon-in-chief Donald Trump in personal lawsuits against government agencies and media outlets as interim dean. So much for
meritocracy.
There you go. But listen to this. This is the guy that was sanctioned by the district judge, Kathleen Williams, in a ruling stating that Trump's lawsuit against the IRS amounted to improper self-dealing. And that settlement originally intended to create that $1.8 billion fund that we were just talking about that would benefit Trump's allies. And in the ruling, Williams blocked Epstein from appearing in the Southern District of Florida pro hac vice, which is some of that Latin that you guys got to speak in order to get the
Pro
law.
hac vice.
Oh,
actually,
vice.
yeah.
Okay. That's why you're here. And what that is, according to the article, is a mechanism attorneys use to practice law in a state or jurisdiction where they're not licensed to practice, because Epstein is not a member of the Florida bar.
Yeah, and you also have to be, even if you're a member of the Florida bar, you have to become admitted to the federal, the southern, middle, and northern districts, and that judge was in the southern district. But that is incredible that a judge would say you can't even be admitted to practice here for a year, I think it was, Gary.
Yeah, you couldn't even
could not
file
apply
anything, in the southern district.
So let's make him the dean of the law school. Is that
What is that going to do for the integrity of the school? Well, especially in view of the credentials of so many of the candidates who were passed over for it.
We use the term corruption a fair amount, but I think there's a good reason. There are different levels. One level of it is what's happened in the state of Florida is you've turned this educational system into a political system. It's happened as you know, Gary, at our alma mater, the University of Florida. It's happened at many universities. What they've done with New College down in Sarasota, saying that was a liberal bastion. We've got to make that conservative. So this, in my opinion, anyway. This corruption includes turning our educational system just into a spoil system. And Florida, we don't need to be slowing down our educational system. We've got enough of a reputation as being just a state that focuses more on things other than education.
Yeah, speaking of New College, just yesterday, the board of trustees, all appointed by DeSantis, decided to basically make the Alumni Association defunct. We no longer have an Alumni Association. And those were the people that had graduated from that college and went there because of the way that it was. I have a niece that went there, and she said it was the best educational experience I've ever had, in any of my schooling. And they've completely turned that on its head and trying to make it a conservative, Bible Belt type school with a sports program. And none of that was there before. It's just shameful what they're doing to the university system. Look at the University of Florida has hired James Uthmeyer to teach a law school class, paying him $100,000 to do that. And it's about government. And he was the guy who was at the center of the Hope Florida scandal where they took $10 million and gave it to
political campaign.
The Tallahassee grand jury should have indicted him.
Yeah. And yet, he's the guy that's teaching the tomorrow's lawyers how to work with government. And, it's shameful. Every week every day there's something else.
Because the conservatives can't convince us with their policies that they're the people that should be running the show. So they figure they've got to resort to indoctrination or stealing elections. Isn't it remarkable how they accuse the Democrats of always stealing elections when there's never been any evidence of that? And yet it was blatantly obvious that Jeb Bush and Kathleen Harris helped W steal Florida and the presidential election in 2000.
And the salaries that these people are making, in these these universities are really high. And so you went from being a legislator that's a part-time job that makes $29,000 a year to getting, to be made the president of New College, making $2 million.
Yeah.
Well, and we as Democrats need to get meaner and tougher and harder, but we get run over by these Republicans with these false premises. One of which is that the educational system is run by all these liberals that are teaching our youngsters all these liberal horrible things. It's affected the merits of these this university. You mentioned this gentleman who wasn't even in the top 20, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And yet they jump him to the head of the line like he's at Disney World and those, the fast pass. And it breeds cynicism as much as anything else, Ed, that merit doesn't carry the day. It's all about politics.
It's who you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he was one of Trump's lawyers, so you get the job.
I remember when I used to listen to Paul Harvey, there had been some scandal that affected some politician. I don't remember specifically what it was, but there had been several of them in over recent years. And he said one day, if you want a successful career in politics, all you need to do is keep a clean record and you'll be elected and have a long career in it. He just wouldn't believe the world we live in today, where you almost need to be a criminal in order to be taken seriously by the Republican Party. He was a conservative. He just wouldn't believe what's going on. Now, Dr. Anthony Fauci is sitting in front of Rand Paul, taking the Fifth Amendment 111 times, refusing to answer questions about the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic during a Senate hearing that he described as a years-long partisan crusade intended to smear him. I want to read his opening statement. It's very brief. He just said, quote, "Given Senator Paul's obvious obsession with calling for my prosecution, his repeated slanderous comments about me, and recently his publicly releasing my personal diary aimed at embarrassing and intimidating me, is that the sole reason he's calling me before this committee is to get me to say something, anything that can vindicate his repeated public pledges that I end up, in his words, quote, behind bars, unquote. Any person who's followed his unhinged obsession with me would come to the same conclusion." This is from the party that put RFK Jr. in charge of Health and Human Services, and we're seeing the results of that, and should be putting people like Tom Homan and Ken Paxton and Donald Trump himself and his family members all behind bars. And they're going after Fauci because he was trying to address COVID. It's unbelievable.
Well, and a complete waste of time. If you want to have something like a 9/11 commission that would actually cared about trying to prevent it from happening again, that's not what this is about. It never was about this. There's been no attempt made on any bipartisan level to try and prevent another pandemic like this. This is solely a gotcha situation with Fauci. Fauci has a long history of public service to this country.
Yeah. 38 years working as the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which is a sub-agency of the National Institutes of Health. And he worked in that agency during 7 presidential administrations.
Yeah.
Focused his research on HIV/AIDS, Ebola, Zika virus, and COVID-19. And he helped design PEPFAR, which was the only good thing to come out of the George W. Bush administration, which was to, provide health care to African nations to stop HIV from spreading rapidly and going around the world. And of course, that's all been gutted by Doge. So, but this is a right-wing conspiracy theory that Fauci somehow was involved in allowing the Chinese in some lab over in China to develop the COVID-19 virus as a weapon, and that he should go to jail because of that. And Rand Paul is livid, and he will fight this to his grave. And they want to put this 86-year-old man in prison. And
they were unhappy the fact that Biden granted him pardon for past conduct, so they try and trap him. Well, let's get him on some
trying to get him to make
perjury.
Any kind of misstatement, so an inconsistent statement in front of Congress, which is a crime. The president ought to be down on his knees thanking Fauci and the NIH for they saved his life. Remember, he was on death's doorstep with COVID himself, and he got one of those treatments that was experimental and had not been approved yet, that saved his life. And that was something that was developed in the NIH. And of course, what have they done to repay that favor? They've cut the funding incredibly.
Well, Rand Paul throws his lawyer out of the hearing room. He then has the gall to threaten Fauci with contempt. You have every right to exercise your constitutional right to take the fifth. Ask Rick Scott, who's our Republican senator, if you can take the fifth, who took it over 100 times in a deposition. So you can't hold anyone in contempt for exercising their constitutional right. Who the hell do you think you are, Rand Paul? This is a complete waste of time. Just like Trump last week complaining about the 2020 election. Will you do something, as you said, Gary, do something that people care about? People don't care about Fauci. They want their rent lower. They want to be able to buy a house. This is a complete waste of time.
By the way, who said this? Whenever someone pleads the fifth to avoid responding to questions, it means they're guilty.
Donald Trump.
What do you know? You mean the guy that invoked the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination more than 440 times during a single deposition in that civil fraud investigation into this organization's business and finance practices? Those questions centered on asset valuations, property sizes, and financial statements, and loans and mortgages. Aside from stating at the very beginning of the session, Trump responded, stating his name, that is. He just, he gives his name and probably his address. And everything else he responded to was same answer, which means I'm taking the fifth.
Yeah,
and of course he was guilty.
They even asked him what color his tie was, and he wouldn't answer that because if he,
You're talking about Fauci.
Maybe, if he said it was fuchsia, I didn't see the tie that he was wearing, but if he called it the wrong name, then they would try to prosecute him for that. You're talking about a DOJ that'll prosecute people for seashells on the beach. They love to go after this guy.
That was the guy from Missouri.
They make up a crime and just make people spend money on lawyers.
By the way, it's come out just this week about the seashell case with Comey. What happened? Trump was very much involved with that, and the Secret Service and illegal conduct. They didn't get a proper warrant with a judge.
Yeah, and what was released this week was some information from inside the Secret Service saying, you can't just go ping somebody's phone, their cell phone. They all have GPS on them. You can't go try to figure out where they are without some probable cause. And that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to find out where he was and whether he was on that beach.
And they had to make an affirmation that there was an emergency or someone was in harm,
that there was
deadly
an
harm.
imminent threat of danger to the president's life. Okay. And so Comey's on the beach with his wife. And they figure that out because they illegally pinged his phone. And then Trump was overseas. So, how's he going to threaten his life on the beach and Trump's not even in the country?
And they were so concerned they waited over a year to bring that charge. They were so concerned about imminent harm. They didn't bring that charge in a timely fashion. That case is going to be dismissed. That case will never get to a jury, as we've said many times.
Should never been brought.
It's, again, waste of resource, complete waste of government funds. It's embarrassing.
Well, it's weaponization of the Justice Department on steroids, which is what Trump said he would end. But in fact, retribution is one of the 5 reasons he wanted to be in power. That, stay out of prison himself, steal as much money as he could. It's hard to believe there's anything left for him to steal. And, of course, to build all the monuments to himself.
One of the things back on Blanche tied to this point with this retribution, Blanche has been out there bragging that they fired anybody that had any connection with any of these prosecutions, which were proper prosecutions, by the way, but they included, and you've mentioned this, Gary, before, not just policy people, the people just doing their job in the Department of Justice. And he kind of backed away from that when he was being questioned about that at the hearing. And they said, well, wait a minute, here you are bragging about everyone that had any connection with all these has been fired from the Department of Justice. What a drain of knowledge and resource that was.
Did you see how much Trump is charging for the advance notification to Wall Street of his Truth Social?
Yes,
post?
I said it earlier, $100,000 a month.
A month, and 6 of them have signed up. 6 of the brokerage firms have signed up to pay $100,000 a month to get, tips.
Gary, he's a grifter. He's all he's doing, and he's milking this as much as he can. I guess, he didn't read the Monuments clause in the Constitution, which says you cannot profit from this position. That's all this man is doing, is milking profit.
And when he's confronted by a reporter, he said, "Oh, nobody cares. Doesn't matter that that's in the Constitution. Nobody cares." Well, what that means is the whores in the Republican Party, who should be upholding the Constitution and their oath of office, are the ones who don't care, which means they, in my opinion, they don't deserve to be Americans, much less be running this government, because they won't stand up for the Constitution of this country and impeach the guy and convict him and get him in prison where he belongs. By the way, speaking of misguided attention, I spotted this over the weekend about grocery prices. The price of a pound of ground beef reached $6.82 in June, which is 79% more than at the beginning of 2019. That's a Bureau of Labor Statistics data. The cost of food, of course, going up, which Trump resolves that issue by simply declaring it a hoax. Is it a Chinese hoax or a Spanish hoax or a Democratic hoax? Well, it doesn't matter. What that means is he has no earthly idea how to deal with it. So he deals with it by dismissing it as if it's not a problem. But what's happening now out in the West is that these ranchers who raise beef cattle are starting to have serious problems getting water, and not just 1 year, but year after year after year. And it's getting more and more serious, which means that they need to reduce the size of their herds, which is only going to translate to increasingly higher beef costs.
And that was before the screw worm situation raised its ugly head.
Yeah, they're needing to truck water into their ranches. One guy's sinking a well that's 500 feet deep. That's a 50-story building in height, right? To try to get water, and he doesn't know if he's going to hit it.
And we need to, I know we're getting close to the end here. We need to keep emphasizing the abuse of the law that's happened with this immigration, with this false premise that this is all about getting rid of the worst of the worst. I was reading last night, and I conveyed to you guys the story about they picked up a guy for a public drunkenness charge that was never even filed. And they mentioned there was a DUI that was never even confirmed. He was deported out, I think, to Guatemala. His family went there voluntarily because that's where now the father was, and the couple was murdered. There's now a child without parents. I mean, this affects real people, and I know with this man is so bad that he does a terrible thing almost every day. But what's happened with this immigration is just scandalous, and it's wrong, and it goes against everything that this country stands for, which is based upon letting people come into this country. We've never had an issue about violent immigrants raping and killing. Never. And they've had, and you've mentioned this, Gary, and you too. Their quotas, and people, it's happening now. I mean, we seem to have just accepted this wrong, that we're going to just throw these people out of this country for no reason. Even some that were citizens disappeared.
There was a husband and wife preachers from Mexico that were here on a religious visa, and then have applied for asylum. Well, they were going to a religious retreat this week and were picked up at the airports, because ICE is now targeting airports to try to pick people up. And they picked them up and separated them from their kids. And then, several days later, they were trying to get them to agree to self-deport using the kids as leverage. We're going to send your kids to Mexico, and if you want to be reunited with them, you have to agree to self-deport. And so when they were asking ICE about it, they go, "Yeah, we do that all the time. We want people to get it and get the hell out of here." And think about that. Think about what you would do for your kids, whether you have a right to be here or not. And these people were in the system trying to get here legally. And now they've been released from detention because their community said, these people aren't bad. We've lived with them for years. They've been our preacher. And we want them to be in the community. And that's what's happening. People are starting to realize that, yes, the border needs to be closed, but they're not picking up the worst of the worst. They never have. They're picking up the low-hanging fruit, the people that are easy to find. There were 3 people picked up in my neighborhood this week in St. Petersburg. My neighbor said she has a crew of people that cut her yard, and she noticed that the head guy wasn't there. And she said, what happened? Is he sick? No, ICE picked him up. And they picked up 2 other family members who are both American citizens. So they picked up 3. This guy was undocumented, but the other 2 are American citizens, and nobody knows where they are.
Wow. Well, this was the principal reason that Trump got elected, was he said he would seal the border, and he did. But then having gone on beyond that to remove people that he's claimed that in Venezuela and some of these other Central American countries, they were just emptying the prisons and the insane asylums and dumping them all here. I guess there were some people that actually believed that, even though there's no truth to it. But like you said, there aren't enough of those people to pick up that people that might come here because they want to sell drugs. Most people just come here for economic reasons. They want a better opportunity to make a stable living and have a better income through their lives. But the way that ICE is operating has even put him underwater in that category, which is really remarkable. Everything else, economics, international relations, the war, we can understand that he doesn't know anything about any of those things. So naturally, he's going to be underwater in those.
And
this was his signature issue, and he's still underwater.
And one result of that is, with all this, what's happening with these redistricting shenanigans, is there's been an assumption, for example, in Texas and Florida, that the Hispanic vote will continue to be pro-Republican.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be in for rude awakening come November on that front.
Absolutely.
Time for our quote of the day. It's from Albert Einstein. This is what he said: "The world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything." Wake up, you idiot Republicans in government. Wake up and do your job. Well, that wraps it up for this edition of The Voice of Reason. We will be back next Thursday morning at 9 o'clock with another edition of Same. I want to thank my co-hosts, Gary Gibbon, Kevin Carey. I'm Ed Golly, reminding you, if the statement seems a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because a conservative said it.
Make them prove it.